The dust was the first thing. It was in his mouth when he woke and in his lungs when he slept. It was the grit under his eyelids and the coat on his soul. Caleb Mercer had been walking through it for 3 years. Or maybe it was 4. The war had ended in 65. He figured this must be 1873. But the seasons had blurred into one long, hot torment. Colorado was a hard land. It promised gold and delivered gravel. It offered sky and gave you wind. Caleb had come here not for riches, but for work. He was strong. He knew horses, and he could fix what was broken, except for himself. But the war had left its mark on him, a hollowness in the eyes that good folk mistook for meanness. He'd ride into a settlement, his face set in the neutral mask he'd worn since Appomattox. He'd ask the liveryman or the smith, "Need a hand?" They'd look him over. They'd see the worn-out Union tunic, dyed a muddy brown but still betraying its origins. They'd see the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, a white seam puckering the sun-scorched leather of his skin. They'd see the coat at his hip, worn from use, not show. "Got nothing," they'd say, or "Don't hire drifters." Sometimes, if they'd worn the gray themselves or just felt bold, they'd add, "Don't want your kind here." So he'd ride on. The pain was a familiar companion, a dull ache behind his ribs that matched the throb in his leg when the weather turned cold. He'd earned that throb at Antietam, lying in a cornfield for 2 days, listening to the dying. The greater pain, the one that had hollowed him, came later. He was riding toward nothing, just following the shadow of the mountains, when he smelled it. Wood smoke, but not the clean smoke of a cook fire. It was the sour, greasy smell of a life burned to the ground. He knew it well. His horse, a bony gelding named Judge, stopped without command. Caleb didn't need to look at the landmarks. He was home. He slid from the saddle, his bad leg complaining. The cabin was gone. 2 stone chimneys stood like tombstones against the bruised purple of the twilight. The iron cook stove lay on its side, rusted and useless. The corral fence was ash. He walked to where the front door had been. He stood there, hat in hand, the wind pulling at his hair. This was where he had left them. Sarah, with her quick laugh and hands that were never still. Thomas, his boy, who was just learning to make a proper fist, just 6 years old. Caleb had gone to fight for a principle, for a union he wasn't even sure he believed in. He'd left them here, believing the war was far away. But the war was everywhere. It was in the hearts of men, raiders. The letter had said, not soldiers, just men who used the chaos as an excuse. They'd come through, taken what little there was, and burned the rest. The letter had been waiting for him when he was mustered out. It was a year old by then. Caleb knelt and touched the charred foundation stone. He closed his eyes. He didn't see the memory, he felt it, the imagined sound of Sarah's scream, high and thin like a hawk's, the smell of burning pine, the same pine he had cut and stacked himself. He saw his boy's tin soldier, the one he'd bought in Denver, melting in the embers. He had come back here to feel it, to remind himself. There was no God. There was no justice. There was only the dust and the long, empty road. He was a ghost, haunting the edges of his own life. He made a cold camp that night, half a mile away, within sight of the chimneys. He didn't deserve a fire. He ate dry biscuits and jerky, sharing a piece with Judge. He lay on his bedroll, staring up at the spray of stars. They offered no comfort. They were just cold fires, far away. He didn't sleep. He just waited for the sun to rise, so he could start moving again. Moving was the only thing that kept the ghosts from walking right through him. 2 days later, the land changed. The sparse grass gave way to cracked alkali flats and jagged red rock. This was country that hated a man. He was checking Judge's hoof for a stone when he saw the buzzards, a dozen of them, circling low. His first instinct was to ride on. It was a dead deer, most likely, or a calf, none of his business. But something made him pull his rifle from its scabbard. He nudged Judge forward. It was not a deer. It was a person, lying face down in the shadow of a mesquite bush. A woman. He stopped 20 yards off. He scanned the horizon. No one, no horses, just the wind and the patient circling of the birds. He dismounted, his rifle light in his hands. He walked slow. The woman was small. She wore a dark blue dress, the kind a townswoman might wear, now ripped and covered in dust. Her hair was a wild tangle of black curls. One arm was flung out, her hand clutching a small, leather-bound book. He nudged her shoulder with his boot. "Ma'am." A low groan, so quiet he almost missed it. She was alive. Caleb sighed. It was a sound of profound weariness. Alive meant trouble. It meant involvement. He had nothing left to get involved with. He knelt, his knees cracking. He put his rifle down and gently, with a roughness born of disuse, turned her over. His breath caught. She was young. Her face was the color of pale honey, smeared with dirt and dried blood. Her features were fine, her lips full. She was half black, half white, an outsider like him, but in a way he could never understand. Then he saw the wound. Her left shoulder was a mass of dark, clotted blood. The dress was stuck to it. Bullet hole, not a stray shot. Someone had hunted her. He looked around again. Sharper this time. He saw tracks. Horses, 3 of them, riding hard. And her tracks, small boots, stumbling, running, falling. She'd been running for a long time. He stood up. He could leave her. It was the smart thing to do. He had his own ghosts. He didn't need hers. He looked up at the buzzards. They were waiting. He thought of Sarah. He thought of her lying in the dirt. "Damn it," he whispered. He put his rifle away and leaned down. "All right, ma'am. Let's see about this." She was light, but lifting her sent a bolt of fire through his own bad leg. He got her draped over the front of his saddle, her head lolling against his arm. She felt hot, fevered. She mumbled something, but the words were lost. He remembered a place, an old mining shack, tucked into a draw about 3 miles back. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. The ride was slow. He held her steady, his arm around her waist. Her hair smelled of dust and fear. He tried not to look at her. He tried to think of her as cargo, a sack of flour. But she was warm, and she was breathing. And it had been a long time since he had held anything but a rifle. The shack was as he remembered. 4 crumbling sod walls and a piece of tin for a roof. A prospector's failed dream. But the door was still on its leather hinges. He carried her inside and laid her on the dirt floor, on his bedroll. The single room was dark and smelled of rat droppings and dry rot. He gave Judge a little water from his canteen and tethered him behind the shack, out of sight. Then he went back inside. He built a small fire in the rusted-out stove, just enough to boil water. He took out his knife. He took out the bottle of whiskey he kept for snakebite and memory. "This is going to hurt, ma'am," he said to her sleeping form. "But that bullet's got to come out." He tore her dress away from the wound. The skin was red and swollen. The bullet was in deep. He poured whiskey over the wound. She woke up. Her eyes flew open and she screamed. It was a raw, terrified sound. She didn't see a man. She saw a nightmare, a bearded stranger with a knife, leaning over her in the dark. "No!" she cried, scrambling backward, dragging herself against the wall. The movement tore the wound open. Fresh blood welled. "Get away from me! Please, don't hurt me!" "Hold still," Caleb said, his voice a low growl. "You move like that, you'll bleed out." "You're one of them," she sobbed, her eyes wild, searching for an escape. "He sent you, didn't he, to bring me back?" Caleb stopped. He held the knife and the whiskey bottle. He looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't just a wounded woman. She was hunted, and she thought he was the hunter. "I ain't one of anyone," he said flatly. "I found you in the desert. You've been shot. Now you can let me get the lead, or you can die here in the dirt. Your choice." She stared at him. Her breathing was fast and shallow. She saw the knife. She saw his face, hard and unreadable in the firelight. She saw no pity there, but she saw no lie, either. She slumped against the wall, her energy gone. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Name's Caleb." He didn't offer more. He knelt beside her again. "This is it." He didn't give her a stick to bite on. He didn't have one. He just pressed her good shoulder flat with one hand and cut with the other. Her scream was muffled by the sod walls. Her body arched, but he held her down. He probed with the knife, his face grim. He'd done this before. On men who were his friends, it never got easier. He felt the lead, scraped it against the bone, and hooked it. He pulled it out, a flattened piece of metal, and dropped it on the floor. She had passed out again. "Good," he muttered. He poured more whiskey into the raw hole, then took his shirt from his saddlebag and tore it into strips. He packed the wound and bound it tight. He covered her with his blanket. He sat back on his heels, exhausted. The fire was dying. He watched her in the flickering light. Her face was peaceful now, the panic gone. He saw the book lying where it had fallen from her hand. He picked it up. It was a thin volume, poems, by John Keats. He opened it. The inside cover read, "To my dearest Rosalie, may your mind always be your wings. Love, Mother, Rosalie." He closed the book and put it beside her. He went outside and sat with his back to the shack, his rifle across his knees. He watched the moon rise over the canyon. He had saved her, and he already regretted it. She was awake when he came back in at dawn. She was sitting up, her back against the wall, the blanket clutched to her chest. Her eyes followed him as he reset his pack. The fear was still there, but something else was, too. A sharp, assessing intelligence. "The water is in the canteen," he said, not looking at her. He tossed a piece of jerky onto the bedroll. "Eat." He went outside to check on Judge. When he returned, the jerky was untouched. The canteen hadn't moved. "You need to eat," he said, his patience thin. "I don't trust you," she said. Her voice was weak, but clear, educated, not the voice of a field hand. Caleb shrugged. "Trust has got nothing to do with it. You don't eat, you get weaker. You get weaker, you die. I didn't pull that bullet out just to watch you starve." He sat on the other side of the small room, his back to the wall, and began to clean his rifle. The silence stretched out. It was thick and painful. He could hear her breathing, the catch in it when the pain hit her. She could hear the scrape of the oil rag on the metal. Hours passed. The sun climbed, heating the shack like an oven. Caleb dozed, sitting up. He didn't sleep deep. He hadn't in years. He woke to find her watching him. "How long was I out there?" she asked. He blinked, his mind coming back from the cornfield. "A day, maybe more." "Where are we?" "Old shack, middle of nowhere." "Why?" He stopped cleaning his rifle. He looked at her. "Why what? Why did you help me? You could have left me." "I could have." He agreed. You're not a bounty hunter." Caleb gave a short, harsh laugh. "Do I look like I'm getting paid? No, ma'am, I'm just a man trying to get by. My name is Rosalie." He nodded. "I know. Saw your book." This seemed to alarm her. She grabbed the book and pulled it close. "You read it?" "Just the front. I ain't much for poetry." She relaxed. Just a fraction. She looked at the jerky. Her stomach growled. Slowly, she picked it up and began to chew. It was tough, salty, and the best thing she had ever tasted. She drank from the canteen, wincing as she moved her shoulder. "The men who shot me," she said, her voice low. "Did you see them?" "No, just tracks. 3 riders. They were long gone. They'll come looking. Likely." Caleb went back to his rifle. They find you. Ain't my concern." "Then why did you stop?" she pressed. He snapped the rifle back together. Buzzards were circling. "I don't like buzzards." He stood up. "I'm going to find us something to eat besides jerky. Don't you go wandering off." He left. Rosalie listened to his footsteps fade. She was alone, but the terror was ebbing. He was a hard man, a cold man, but he had not hurt her. He had given her water. He had bound her wound. He was, she realized, the first man in a long time who had asked her for nothing. He came back near dusk with 2 rabbits. He skinned them outside and cooked them in the stove. The smell of roasting meat filled the tiny room. He handed her a piece on the end of his knife. She took it, her fingers brushing his. His hand was calloused and scarred. They ate in silence. The barrier between them was still there, but it was different. They were two people in a box, breathing the same air, eating the same food. As the sun set, the sky turned a sickly yellow. A low whistling sound started, a high, thin moan. Caleb stood and looked out the cracked door. "Get away from the walls," he said, his voice sharp. "What is it?" "Sandstorm." He had barely spoken the words when it hit. The wind shrieked, a physical blow that rattled the tin roof. The world outside vanished in a solid, churning wall of brown. Dust poured through the doorframe, through the cracks in the walls. Caleb slammed the door shut and braced it with a piece of old timber. The room went black. Save for the red glow of the stove vents, the sound was deafening. It was like being inside a giant drum. Rosalie pulled the blanket over her head. Coughing, Caleb sat near the door. His bandana pulled up over his nose. They were forced together, just feet apart in the roaring dark. The storm howled all night. It was impossible to sleep. They just sat, two shadows in the suffocating gloom. The wind was a living thing, trying to tear the shack apart. Sometime after midnight, in a brief lull when the wind momentarily caught its breath, Rosalie spoke. Her voice was a whisper, but in the sudden quiet, it sounded as loud as a gunshot. "Why did you help me?" Caleb didn't move. He was a shape against the door, his rifle across his knees. He heard her. He thought of the raiders. He thought of the letter, folded in his pocket. That told him his life was over. He thought of this woman, with her educated voice and her hunted eyes. He had stopped for her because he was a fool, because he had seen his wife's body in the dust, and he could not, for all his emptiness, watch another woman be given to the buzzards. It was an act of weakness, a betrayal of the numbness he had worked so hard to build. He had saved her, and in doing so, he had tied himself to the world again. He had taken on a burden. It was his punishment. He didn't answer. He sat in the dark, listening to the wind, and his silence was a confession to it all. The storm broke as suddenly as it had come, leaving the world scoured and silent. When Caleb opened the shack door, the air was cold and sharp, the sky a bruised, clean purple. The dust was gone, settled into a smooth, brown carpet over everything. Rosalie was leaning against the wall. The fever had taken hold, her skin hot and dry, her eyes too bright, but the bleeding had stopped. "We move," Caleb said. He kicked the embers of the fire, killing them. I cannot ride," she whispered, the admission costing her. "I know." He packed his meager supplies. He put his bedroll and blanket on Judge, then helped her to her feet. She swayed, her good hand gripping his arm. He put her on the horse. He walked beside, his hand on her leg to steady her, his bad leg aching with every step. They made it 2 miles before she fainted, sliding sideways off the horse. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground. She was a dead weight in his arms. He laid her on the sand. He looked north, toward the trading post he knew was 2, maybe 3 days' walk. Then he looked at her. He was chained to her. He cursed, a low, bitter sound. He couldn't carry her and lead the horse. He couldn't leave her. He left her in the thin shade of a juniper and walked, his hatchet in his hand, toward a dry wash where a few skeletal cottonwoods grew. He was gone for an hour. Rosalie woke to the sound of chopping. She panicked, trying to sit up, thinking the men had found her. Then she saw Caleb, dragging 2 long, sturdy poles. Judge stood nearby, watching him with patient indifference. He said nothing. He laid the poles parallel on the ground. He lashed cross-sections of branches between them with his rope. He took his knife and began sacrificing his own bedroll, cutting the canvas into strips to secure the frame. He laid his last blanket over the lattice. He'd made a travois. He rigged it to Judge's saddle. The poles would drag on the ground. "No," Rosalie said. Her voice was thin. Caleb turned. He hadn't spoken a word. "I will not be dragged. Not like that. It's for cargo. For the dead." Her face was flushed with fever and shame. She was educated. She was a lady. despite her skin, despite her circumstances. This was a humiliation she could not bear. "I will walk." She tried to stand. Her legs buckled. She fell to her knees in the dirt. Caleb walked over to her. He stood above her, a tall, dark shape against the sun. He didn't offer a hand. "You walked 500 yards, he said, his voice flat. "And it took you an hour. We stay here. We die. The men hunting you will find us, or the sun will. I ain't dying here, not for your pride." He leaned down, grabbing her by the good arm. He hauled her to her feet and pushed her toward the sled. She stumbled, tears of weak rage blurring her vision. "I will not," she insisted, her voice breaking. He got in her face then. His eyes were cold, as dead as the stones around them. "You want to live or die out here? I ain't asking again." The growl in his voice, the utter lack of pity, broke her. This was not a negotiation. This was survival, and he was the only thing she had. She let him lift her. He laid her on the travois. It was hard and agonizingly uncomfortable. He tied her in place with the last of the rope, so she wouldn't fall off. She turned her face away from him, squeezing her eyes shut. She felt the vibrations as he mounted Judge. Then, the lurching pull as they began to move. The journey was a blur of pain. Every rock, every dip in the terrain, sent a jolt through her wounded shoulder and rattled her bones. The sun beat on her. The dust, kicked up by Judge's hooves, coated her face and filled her mouth. Caleb never looked back. He just rode, a rigid figure, leading her deeper into the wilderness. They traveled through dry scrublands that tore at the blankets, and down into broken canyons of red rock that echoed Judge's lonely footsteps. Caleb was heading toward the high country, toward the mountains, where there would be water and timber. The first 2 days, Rosalie was barely conscious. Caleb stopped only when he had to, tending to her wound with a grim efficiency. He cleaned it with the last of the whiskey and fresh water he found at a seep. He hunted, bringing back rabbits and sage grouse, which he cooked at night. He would lift her head and force her to drink broth, then water. He kept her alive with a stubborn, angry determination. He saw her not as a woman, but as a task, a heavy one. On the 3rd night, her fever broke. She woke in the dark, soaking wet with sweat, but her mind was clear. A small fire popped nearby. Caleb was sitting against his saddle, his rifle across his lap, watching the darkness. "He'll find me," she whispered. Caleb didn't jump. He'd known she was awake. "Who?" "Mr. Croft, Silas Croft, the man I ran from. He doesn't like to lose his property." Caleb fed a piece of greasewood into the fire. "You ain't property." Rosalie laughed. A dry, sad sound. "The law in Denver says otherwise. He bought my paper. He bought me. I was to be his wife's personal servant, a maid, but that wasn't what he wanted." Caleb looked at her. Her dress was ruined. Her hair was matted with blood and dirt. But in the firelight, he saw the fineness of her face, the intelligence in her eyes. "He wanted me in his bed," she said, her voice flat, stating a fact. "His wife knew. She hated me for it. She's the one who gave me the money to run. She told me if I was gone, he might look at her again. She told me to run or to kill myself. It was all the same to her." Caleb looked back into the fire. He thought of his wife, Sarah. He couldn't imagine her doing such a thing. He couldn't imagine her ever being that cold. "So you ran?" He said. "I ran. I bought a ride on a freight wagon, but his men caught up to me near Pueblo. I got away, but they shot me. I've been walking for, I don't know, a long time." Silence fell again. But it was different. She had given him her story. He now owned a piece of it. "My mother was a school teacher," Rosalie said, her voice softer. She was staring at the flames, her gaze far away. "She was born free in Philadelphia. She taught me to read from the Bible and from her poetry books. She wanted me to have a life of the mind. She always said no one could take what was in my head." She touched the small leather book by her side. "She died, on the wagon to Denver. Fever." Caleb watched her. This small, broken thing on the ground was educated. She spoke better than any woman he knew, save for the preacher's wife back home. "I wanted to be a nurse," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "I'm good at it. I know herbs. I helped my mother. She was the one everyone went to when the doctor was too drunk or too expensive. I like fixing things that are broken." Caleb looked down at his own hands, scarred and hard. He broke things. He had been good at it. It was the only skill the war had left him. He was seeing her now, not as a burden, not as a job, but as a person whose life had been burned down, just like his. "You talk too much," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. He stood up and walked to the edge of the firelight to check on Judge. "Go to sleep. We move at dawn." Rosalie watched him go. He was a hard man, harder than any she had ever met, but he was still here. The land became their enemy. The days were hot, the nights bitter cold. Caleb's skills were the only thing that kept them from the buzzards. He found water in places that looked barren, digging into damp sand and letting it fill his canteen drop by drop. He shot a rattlesnake that was coiled near Rosalie's travois, skinned it, and roasted it over the fire. "Meat's meat," he said, handing her a piece. She ate it at night. They heard wolves, a large pack, their calls echoing off the canyon walls. Judge would stomp and pull at his tether. Caleb sat up all night, his back to Rosalie, the rifle across his knees. He didn't sleep. He was a barrier of silent, exhausted vigilance between her and the howling dark. They were following a high, narrow ridge, trying to get to the valley on the other side. Caleb was leading Judge, the travois scraping and bouncing over the rocks. The path was shale, loose and treacherous. He put his foot down, and the ground simply wasn't there. His bad leg, the one that had taken the mini-ball at Antietam, gave out. He stumbled, twisting, throwing his weight back to keep Judge from being pulled over the side. The horse panicked, rearing, and Caleb was slammed hard against the rock face. He didn't make a sound, but he went white, his breath hissing between his teeth. "Mr. Mercer?" Rosalie cried from the travois. "Quiet," he bit out. He calmed Judge, his voice low and steady, even as his left hand was pressed tight against his ribs. "We're moving." He got them off the ridge and into a small clearing sheltered by pines. He leaned against a tree, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. "I'm fine," he said, when he saw her watching him. But when he tried to pull the heavy saddle off Judge, he couldn't. His arm wouldn't take the strain. He grunted, a sharp sound of pain, and leaned his forehead against the horse's warm flank. Rosalie untied the rope that held her. Every movement sent fire through her shoulder, but she ignored it. She slid off the travois and staggered to her feet. "Sit down," she said. He turned to argue, but the look on her face stopped him. The fear was gone. In its place was an authority he hadn't seen, the nurse. He slid down the trunk of the pine and sat hard on the ground. Rosalie, using her one good arm, clumsy and slow, managed to unbuckle the cinch. The heavy saddle slid, and she deftly moved out of the way as it thudded to the ground. She rubbed the horse down, her movements practiced. Then she came to him. "Let me see," she commanded. "It's nothing, an old wound. It is bleeding. Mr. Mercer, take off your shirt." He glared at her, a cornered animal. Being tended to was a weakness he could not afford, but the pain was a sharp knife in his side, and he was too tired to fight her. He pulled the ragged shirt over his head, wincing. His torso was a map of his life, a puckered star on his thigh, a long, white scar across his abdomen, and on his left side, over his ribs, was a dark, ugly bruise, already swelling. An old, poorly healed scar ran right through it, and the skin had split open. "You fell on this before," she observed. She touched the edge of the wound. Her fingers were gentle, clinical. "Cannon fire knocked me off a caisson," he mumbled. "Ribs never set right. You've broken them again, or at least cracked them." She looked around. "I need to bind this tight, or you'll puncture a lung." She went to the travois and took her book. From inside it, she pulled a small sewing kit. a needle, and a spool of dark thread. Then she took his knife and began to cut long, clean strips from her own petticoat, the only clean cloth they had. She knelt in front of him. "This will hurt," he just nodded, setting his jaw. She began to wrap him. Her movements were sure. She pulled the cloth tight, forcing the air from his lungs. He gritted his teeth, sweat popping on his forehead, but he didn't move. She was all business, her focus entirely on the wound. She tied the last knot. Her good hand rested on his bare chest to steady herself as she leaned back. The firelight flickered. They were inches apart. He was breathing her air. He could smell the dust and the faint, clean scent of the soap she must have used weeks ago. He looked at her face. He saw the dark sweep of her eyelashes, the firm line of her mouth. He saw the woman, not the burden. A deep, unfamiliar ache started in his chest. It was a terrible, sharp longing that he had buried with his wife and son. It was the feeling of being alive. He hated it. He saw her eyes lift to his. She wasn't afraid. She was just looking, seeing him. He leaned in. His body moved without his permission. Her breath hitched. Her lips parted. He stopped, a fraction from her. He saw the ruined man in her eyes. He saw the ghost he was. He saw Sarah's face, screaming in the fire. He recoiled, pulling back as if she had burned him. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the agony in his ribs, and stalked to the far side of the fire. He turned his back to her. "Don't," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Don't what?" she asked, her voice quiet. "I'm not the man you think I am." He was speaking to the trees, to the darkness. "You look at me. You think I'm nothing. I'm what the war spit out. What's left of me is poison." He waited for her to recoil, to agree. The silence stretched. The wind moved through the pines. "I never said I thought you were good," she whispered. He turned slowly. She was still kneeling by the fire, the strips of her petticoat in her lap. "I've seen good men, Mr. Mercer. They're usually the first ones dead. They're polite, and they follow the rules. And they die in burning houses." Her voice was steady, gaining strength. "I never said you were good. I said you were alive. And you kept me alive. Goodness doesn't have much to do with it out here." Caleb stared at her. She saw him. She saw all the darkness. And she was not turning away. He had no words for that. He picked up his rifle and sat down, his back against a tree, his face to the darkness. The cold deepened. The fire burned low. Rosalie shivered on the travois. Caleb sat, rigid, the pain in his ribs a steady, hot throb. He heard her teeth begin to chatter. He sighed, the sound lost in the wind. He lay down on his bedroll, his back to the fire, his bad legs stretched out. Rosalie watched him. After a long moment, she stood and walked to the fire. She lay down on the hard ground, on the other side of the flames, curling into a ball. Caleb listened to her shiver. He thought of the wolves. He thought of the cold. Wordlessly, he rolled onto his good side. He didn't say anything. Rosalie understood. She stood, picked up her thin blanket, and walked to his bedroll. She lay down, her back to his. The space between them was electric. They didn't touch, but he could feel the heat radiating from her. She could feel the solid, tense line of his spine. They lay like that for hours, back to back, two broken people, pushed together by the vast, cold wilderness. They were close enough to feel each other's breath, close enough to know the other was real, but they were too shattered to reach out. And in the darkness, neither of them slept. They saw Dry Hollow 2 days later, a collection of unpainted clapboard buildings squatting in a dip in the plains. It wasn't a town so much as a scar, held together by a saloon, a general store, and a livery. Smoke rose from a half-dozen chimneys, hanging low in the cold air. As they got closer, Caleb dismounted. "Get on the horse," he said. Rosalie looked at him, confused. Her shoulder was healing, but she was still weak. "I can walk. Get on the horse," he repeated, his voice flat, And pull your blanket up. Cover your hair. Pull it low. Over your face. She understood then. The chill she felt had nothing to do with the wind. She did as he asked, mounting Judge and pulling the ragged wool up so only her eyes were visible. Caleb walked, leading the horse, his bad leg dragging in the dust. He looked like any other broken drifter, leading a horse with what might be a sick wife. He kept his hat low. The town was mean. He felt it the moment they entered the single, muddy street. Men watched them from the porch of the saloon, their eyes cold and assessing. A woman in a gray bonnet, sweeping the porch of the store, stopped and stared, her mouth a thin line of disapproval. There were no friendly faces, just suspicion. He went to the livery. It smelled of wet hay and manure. A stooped, one-eyed man came out of the gloom. "Need a stall for the horse," Caleb said. "And a place to sleep. Got any rooms?" The man spat a stream of tobacco juice. "This ain't a hotel. Got a tack room in the back, full of harness. Got a cot." "How much?" $3 a week. Pay now." Caleb counted out the coins. He had $7.40 left. "Need to bring my wife in. She's sick." The liveryman squinted at the blanket-wrapped figure on the horse. "Don't want no sickness here. No pox. It's a lung fever." Caleb lied. "She just needs to be warm. She won't be no trouble." The man grunted. "Your trouble, not mine. Rooms in the back. Don't let her wander. And no fires. Use a lantern." Caleb nodded. He led Judge into the dark, pungent stable. He found the room. It was hardly a room at all. It was a closet, smelling of leather oil and horse sweat. A narrow cot was pushed against one wall, and broken saddles were piled in the corner. But it had 4 solid walls and a door. He helped Rosalie down. She staggered, stiff from the cold. "Here?" she whispered, looking at the dirt floor. "It's safe," he said. "It's hidden." He unbarred the single small window, which looked out onto a trash heap in the back of the saloon. "Keep this shuttered. Don't go out. Not ever. I'll bring food." She nodded, her face pale. "What will you do?" "Find work. A man like me can always find work digging holes or lifting heavy things." He took his rifle. "Lock this door after me. There's a bolt on the inside. Don't open it for anyone." He left her there, in the dark. Rosalie slid the heavy wooden bolt into place. She sat on the cot, the smell of the stable thick in her nose. She was in a box, a prisoner again. But this time the jailer was the man who had saved her. Caleb found work within the hour. A rancher named Ayers needed wells dug on his north pasture. The ground was hard as iron, baked dry by the summer and now frozen hard by the fall. It was back-breaking, brutal work, sunrise to sunset. The pay was 50 cents a day, plus a noon meal of beans and stale bread. He took it. He worked with 3 other men, drifters and outcasts like himself. They spoke little. They just dug, the rhythm of the pick and shovel the only sound. Caleb kept his head down. He ate his beans alone. He collected his pay at dusk, bought bread, cheese, and a small tin of kerosene at the general store, and walked back to the livery. He knocked on the door. 1 hard, 2 soft. The bolt slid back. He slipped inside. Rosalie was sitting on the cot in the dark. The tiny room was freezing. "I brought food," he said, handing her the parcel. She took it, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you." He lit the lantern, and the small room filled with a smoky, yellow light. He saw she had been trying to clean. The broken harnesses were stacked neatly. She had used her own petticoat to wipe the dust from the cot. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall, his broken ribs aching. He ate his half of the bread and cheese in silence. She watched him. "Your leg is worse," she said. "It's the digging. It'll be fine. Let me see it." "No." She didn't push. She broke her bread and ate. The silence between them was heavy. "I found this," she said, holding up a small, water-damaged book. It was a primer, the kind used in schools. McGuffey's First Eclectic Reader. It was under the cot. Caleb grunted. "Good. Something to read." You read your letter," she said, testing the ground. The one you carry." He stiffened. "I can read what I need to, but you struggle with the words." She said softly, "I heard you, in the shack. You were trying to read the name on the stove. It's Glore, glory." His face darkened. "I had no schooling." "I did," she said. "My mother taught me. I can teach you. While we wait." Caleb looked at her, his pride warring with a deep, hidden shame. He had signed his muster papers with an X. An officer had written, "Caleb Mercer." His mark. He had never forgotten the feeling. "I'm too old for school," he muttered. "You're not too old to learn." She opened the book. The lantern light fell on the first page, a picture of a cat. "It's just sounds. Letters are sounds." And so the routine began. For 2 weeks, Caleb dug. He left before dawn, his body a solid block of pain. He worked until his hands were cracked and bleeding, his ribs a fire in his side. He endured the cold stares in town, the whispered word Yankee behind his back. He was a ghost, haunting the edges of Dry Hollow. And every night, he would return to the tiny room. He would bolt the door. Rosalie would light the lantern. She would have saved part of her own meager meal for him, knowing his work was harder. He never acknowledged it, but he always ate it. Then, she would open the primer. "The Seat," he would read, his voice a low growl, his finger tracing the word. "Cat," she would correct him. "Shorta cat, like hat. The cat is sat on the emat." He was slow. His mind, so quick to read the land or the intentions of a dangerous man, was clumsy with the letters. He would get frustrated, wanting to throw the small book against the wall. But Rosalie was patient. Her voice was calm, a soft counterpoint to the rough, male world outside. "That's right, Caleb," she'd say, and the sound of his name in her educated voice was strange. No one had called him Caleb in years. It was Mercer or Soldier or you. He learned to write his name. She guided his calloused hand, her smaller, darker one over his CLEB. He wrote it over and over on a piece of slate she'd found in those long, dark hours. The walls of the stable room seemed to shrink. They were always close. He would sit on the floor, and she on the cot, their knees almost touching. He became intensely aware of her, the smell of her hair, which she washed with the bar of lye soap he'd bought, the way her hands moved when she mended his shirt, the stitches small and perfect. He began to look at her, really look at her. He stopped seeing the color of her skin. He stopped seeing her as a burden. He saw Rosalie. He saw the intelligence in her dark eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. He saw the grace in her movements, even in this cramped, foul-smelling room. He saw a woman who was stronger than he was, in all the ways that mattered. She, in turn, began to see past his scars. She saw the man who dug wells for 12 hours and brought her back cheese. She saw the way his eyes softened when he was finally able to read a sentence on his own. She saw the exhaustion he carried, a weight heavier than his rifle. She saw the kindness he tried so hard to bury, the kindness that had made him stop for her in the desert. One night, he brought back more than just bread. He had been paid for the week. He handed her a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. She opened it. It was a bar of soap, not the harsh lye soap, but a small, pink bar that smelled of roses, and a new, clean ribbon for her hair. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. It was the first gift, the first beautiful thing she had received in memory. It was just at the store, he mumbled, turning away, embarrassed. "Figured you were tired of smelling like a horse." "Thank you," she whispered. The tension in the room became a living thing. It was in the way their hands brushed when he passed her the water tin. It was in the way he averted his eyes when she dressed her healing shoulder. It was in the long silences that fell between them. Silences that were no longer empty, but filled with unspoken things. He was a man who had lost everything. He had walled himself in ice. And this woman, with her patient voice and her quiet dignity, was slowly, painfully, melting him. He was starting to feel again, and it terrified him. He came back late one evening, past dark. The digging had gone on until sunset. He was covered in mud, his body screaming for rest. He knocked their signal. The bolt didn't slide. He knocked again. Harder. "Rosalie?" He heard a muffled sound, and the bolt slid back. He pushed the door open. She was there. The room was lit by the lantern, placed on the floor. The stable's large iron horse trough, usually empty, had been dragged into the center of the room. It was half full of water. He must have left his canteen, and she had spent hours hauling buckets from the stable pump. She was standing in the trough, her back to him. She had just taken off her ruined dress. Her hair was piled on her head, held up with his new ribbon. Her shift was pooled at her feet. She was naked. Her skin, in the warm lantern light, was smooth and brown. He saw the curve of her spine, the vulnerability of her neck, the new pink scar on her shoulder. Caleb froze. His throat went dry. He had seen bodies, hundreds of them, mutilated, broken, dead. But he had not seen this. He had not seen life, whole and vulnerable and beautiful, in a long, long time. He made a choked sound. He turned, his hand fumbling for the door, his heart pounding a sick, fast rhythm against his broken ribs. "I'm sorry, I didn't—" "Caleb!" Her voice stopped him. It was not panicked. It was not ashamed. It was calm. He stopped, his back to her, his hand on the door. He couldn't look. "You can turn around," she said. "No, I shouldn't have. I heard you. I was so dirty." She dipped a cloth in the water. He heard the splash, the sound of water on her skin. "I'm not ashamed. Not of this. You've seen worse things, I'm sure of it." He was still, rigid. He thought of the cornfield at Antietam. He thought of his burned-out homestead. "I have," he said, his voice a rasp. He heard her move, the sound of water dripping. He turned his head, just slightly. She was watching him, her arms crossed over her breasts, but not in fear, in simple modesty. "But maybe not better," she said, finishing her thought. The words hit him harder than a bullet. He turned, slowly, and looked at her. She held his gaze. She was not an object. She was not a victim. She was a woman, in a horse trough, in a dirty stable, and she was more beautiful than any woman he had ever seen. The image of her, bathed in gold light, burned itself into his mind. He turned back to the door. I'll wait outside, until you're done." He closed the door and stood in the dark stable, his back pressed against the wood. He was shaking. When he came back in, the trough was gone, pushed back to its corner. She was dressed in her mended dress, her hair damp and dark. She was sitting on the cot, the primer in her lap. But she wasn't reading. He sat on the floor, on his usual spot. But the space had changed. The air was charged. "We can read," she said. "I can't." He said, "Not tonight." His mind was full of her. He looked at her, and she looked back. The longing, the raw, animal want that he had kept chained for so long, broke free. He moved. He didn't think. He crossed the 2 feet between them in an instant. He knelt in front of her, put his muddy hands on either side of her face, and kissed her. It was a terrible kiss. It was clumsy and hard, all desperation and need. It tasted of dust and hunger and loneliness. It was the kiss of a starving man, a drowning man. He poured all his grief, his rage, and his terrible aching want into it, and she kissed him back. Her hands came up and gripped his wrists. She met his hunger with her own. She was not a passive thing. She was alive, and she was just as desperate as he was. He kissed her for a long minute, a year, a lifetime. Then, the ice slammed back into his veins. He remembered who he was. He remembered the blood on his hands. He remembered his wife. He tore himself away from her, falling back on his heels, breathing hard. He was horrified. "No," he whispered, scrubbing his mouth with the back of his hand. "No, I can't." Rosalie's eyes were dark, her lips swollen. "Caleb, I don't deserve you," he bit out. The words ripped from his gut. "I don't deserve to touch anything clean. I told you, I'm poison." He got to his feet, ready to flee, to run out into the night and keep running. Rosalie stood up. She was not crying. Her voice was as firm as the iron pump outside. "You don't get to choose who I want," she said. "I do." He stared at her, stunned. "You think you're the only one who's broken?" she said, her voice rising with a passion he'd never heard. "You think you're the only one with ghosts. I am here. I am alive. And you are the one who kept me that way. You don't get to decide what I deserve, or what I want. That's my choice, not yours." He had no answer. He stood there, undone, seen to the very core of him. Before he could speak, before he could think, there was a loud crash from the saloon next door. Shouting, a bottle breaking. "Damn drunks," Caleb muttered, his nerves raw. But then, a different voice cut through the noise. A cold, clear voice. Not drunk. It carried from the saloon's back door, which was just yards from their window. "I'm not looking for trouble. I'm looking for a girl." The voice was smooth, with a southern drawl. About so high, light-skinned, a mulatto girl, gone missing from Denver territory. Name of Rosalie. Saw. Caleb's blood turned to ice. He looked at Rosalie. Her face was a mask of pure terror. She had gone completely white. She ran off from her legal indenture. The cold voice continued. "There's a reward, $500, for her return." Caleb moved, fast and silent. He blew out the lantern, plunging the room into total darkness. He grabbed his rifle and put his hand over Rosalie's mouth, pulling her back, away from the window, as the footsteps of the bounty hunter passed by. They were in total darkness, the bounty hunter's voice a snake sliding under the door. Caleb's hand was over Rosalie's mouth. She was frozen, her terror a living thing against his palm. He felt her heart hammering like a trapped bird. He waited. The footsteps outside faded, moving back toward the saloon. Caleb let out his breath, a slow, silent hiss. He took his hand from her mouth. He was not a man who hesitated. The war had burned that out of him. He knew, with absolute certainty, what came next. "We go," he whispered. His voice was not the voice of the man who had been learning to read. It was the voice of the soldier, the one he kept buried. Now, not a sound. He grabbed his pack, his rifle. He shoved the primer and her book of poems into her hands. "Put this in your dress. Leave everything else." "The door," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He'll hear the bolt." "He won't." Caleb didn't go to the door. He went to the single unshuttered window. He worked the wooden bar free, his movements economical and silent. He eased the shutter open. It looked out on the trash heap. Beyond that, the open night. "Go," he said. She hiked her skirts and climbed through. She was small and made almost no sound landing in the refuse. Caleb followed, a long shadow unfolding from the blackness. He pulled the shutter closed, but didn't bar it. It was a small thing, but it might buy them time. He grabbed her hand. "Stay low. Walk in my steps." He didn't go toward the street. He went back, deeper into the livery. He knew this place. He knew the one-eyed man was a drunk who slept in the hayloft. He led her to the corral behind the main stable. A dozen horses shifted in the dark. Judge was there, but he didn't go to him. The bounty hunter would look for a man on that horse. At the end of the corral was a small spring wagon, used for hauling feed. Next to it, in a separate pen, were two heavy draft horses. They were slow, but they were strong, and they were anonymous. "Caleb, what are you—" "Quiet," he commanded. He was already in the pen. He found a bridle. The horses were calm, used to being handled at all hours. He moved with a speed and purpose that stunned her. He had done this before. He had stolen horses in the war. It was just another skill, one he thought he had left behind. He bridled both, led them to the wagon, and began to harness them. His hands were sure in the dark, the leather creaking softly. Every sound was a gunshot in the silence. Rosalie stood watch, her body trembling so hard she had to lean against the fence. She was watching him become a criminal. For her. He got the harness set. He pointed to the wagon bed. "Get in. Lie flat. Under the canvas. A dirty piece of sailcloth was bunched in the back. She scrambled in, her heart in her throat. He threw the canvas over her. It smelled of oats and mold. He climbed onto the wagon seat. He didn't use the whip. He just clicked his tongue, a low sound, and released the brake. The wagon groaned, the wheels turning in the thick mud of the corral. He didn't take the road. He drove the wagon straight through the back fence, a flimsy thing of poplar rails. The wood splintered with a sharp crack. "Hold on," he growled. He snapped the reins, and the heavy horses lunged. The wagon crashed through the broken fence and out onto the open prairie. He didn't look back. He drove straight into the darkness, heading west, toward the rising shadow of the mountains. For an hour, he pushed the horses. The wagon groaned and swayed over the uneven ground. Rosalie was tossed like a rag under the canvas, her teeth clenched against the sickness and the fear. Finally, he slowed the team to a walk. The moon had risen, washing the plains in a ghostly, silver light. He looked back. Nothing, just the dark, flat line of the earth. The town was gone. He let the horses breathe. He was shaking. He realized, not from cold, from rage. Guilt gnawed at him. He had stolen. In this land, a horse thief was the lowest thing. It was a hanging offense, no trial needed. He had been a soldier. He had been a farmer. He had been a drifter, but he had never been a thief. He had killed men, yes, but that was war. This was different. This was a line. He had just crossed it, and he hadn't even hesitated. He heard a movement behind him, and Rosalie's head emerged from the canvas. Her face was pale in the moonlight. "They'll follow," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. They will hang you for this. For the horses. For the wagon." "Let them," he said, his voice hard. He looked at her, his eyes dark pits in the shadow of his hat. "I told you, I won't let them take you." He turned back, clicking to the horses. He refused to let her be taken. It was the only law he had left. They traveled for 2 days, pushing west. The plains gave way to rolling foothills, then to the steep, rocky ascent of the Front Range. The wagon was slow, a heavy burden on the grades. He sold it at a small, desperate mining camp, just a collection of tents by a stream. He sold the wagon and one of the draft horses to a prospector for $20 and a bag of supplies, flour, salt, coffee, and a box of cartridges for his rifle. He kept the other horse, a big roan, and bought a pack mule. Now they moved faster. He put Rosalie on the horse, and he walked, leading the mule. They climbed, leaving the open world behind, entering a new land of pine, rock and thin, cold air. The higher they went, the harder it became. The first snow had already fallen here, patches of white in the shadows. The air was different. It hurt to breathe. At night, the temperature plummeted. They huddled together under their one shared blanket, the horse and mule tethered close for warmth, the fire a small, precious thing. They were on a narrow goat track, wind biting at their faces. When Rosalie began to slide from the saddle, I can't," she gasped, her breath clouding. "My shoulder, and the air. I can't breathe." Caleb caught her. She was weak, the altitude and the cold draining her. He found a small overhang, a shallow cave in the rock, and got her out of the wind. He built a fire. She broke. The strength that had carried her through the stable, the patient dignity, it all shattered. She began to weep, deep, gasping sobs that tore at her lungs. "Why?" she cried, her voice raw. "Why are you doing this? Look at us. We are going to die up here." "They will catch us and they will hang you. Why did you not just leave me?" "Why, Caleb?" He sat across the small fire from her, his knees drawn up. He had no defense. He had no answer, not one that made sense. He watched her cry, her pain a physical thing in the air between them. The wall he had built around his heart, the one he had been patching for 8 long years, crumbled. It didn't just crack, it fell. "I had a wife," he said. His voice was dead, a monotone against the wind. "Her name was Sarah, and I had a son, Thomas. He was 6. He had hair the color of corn silk. Rosalie's sobs hitched. She looked at him, her tear-streaked face lit by the fire. I left them, Caleb went on, staring into the flames. I went to fight. For the Union. For a flag. For nothing. I was gone 4 years. I got wounded. I killed men. I watched my friends die. And I lived. He picked up a stick and pushed it into the fire, watching the end glow red. When I got back, when I finally got home, there was nothing, just ash. The chimneys. That's all. Raiders. They came through. While I was gone. While I was off fighting someone else's war. He looked up, and his eyes were not dead. They were filled with an agony so vast and so old. Rosalie had to look away. I wasn't there, he whispered. I wasn't there to stop them. I wasn't there to save them. I failed them. I let them die, and I died, too. I've been dead ever since. Being dead is easy. Rosalie, it's quiet. You don't feel anything. You just walk. He reached across the small fire, his hand shaking. He didn't touch her. He just held his hand out, as if to ward off a ghost. And then I found you, he said, his voice breaking. In the dirt, with the buzzards. And I started to feel again. Just a little. And I hated it. He looked at his own hand, then at her. It hurts, Rosalie. It hurts to want something again, to want to protect someone, to not fail. He finally met her eyes. I don't care if they hang me. I don't care if I die up here. I won't fail again. I am not leaving you. She moved, scrambling around the fire before he could pull back. She knelt in front of him and put her cold hands on his face. She was crying again, but not for herself, for him, for his wife, for his boy. He was crying, too. He didn't know how. Silent tears cut paths through the grime on his face. He was a hollow man, and she was filling him with a pain so sweet it was unbearable. She pulled his face to hers and kissed him. It was not like the first kiss. That one had been hunger and shame. This was something else. This was a promise. It was grief. It was two ruined people trying to make a whole. It was clumsy. His beard was rough against her skin. Their teeth knocked. It was desperate. A deep, hungry, aching need that had nothing to do with grace and everything to do with survival. It was a kiss that said, You are alive? I am alive. We are here. He pulled her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her like steel bands, as if he could weld her to him. He was kissing her hair, her eyes, her neck, in the cold, in the wind, with the fire spitting sparks. They gave in. They gave in to the longing. They gave in to the grief. They gave in to the simple, terrible, human need to not be alone. He found a trapper's cabin the next day. It was half buried in snow. The door off one hinge, but the roof was solid and the stone fireplace was intact. It was shelter. It was a home. He got them inside. He fixed the door, barricading it against the wind. He built a fire that lit the small, one-room space. There was a crude cot, which he piled high with dry pine boughs. That night, they came together again. It was not the frantic, grieving clash on the mountainside. It was slow. It was tearful. It was real. In the cold, dark cabin, with the wind howling outside like a hungry wolf, they held each other. They made love with a clumsy, painful, desperate honesty. They gave each other the only thing they had left, the warmth of their bodies, and the shared, silent acknowledgement of their broken hearts. The next morning, Rosalie woke up alone in the cot. The fire was roaring. She panicked, her heart seizing, thinking he had left her. She scrambled to the one dirt-caked window, and she saw him. He was outside in the snow, his back to her. He had found an old axe head, and he'd hafted it. He was splitting wood. The sound of the axe, the thwack and split, was the only sound in the white world. He was not running. He was not hiding. He was splitting wood. He was providing. He was staying. Rosalie pressed her hand to her mouth and sank to the floor, her shoulders shaking with a feeling she couldn't name. It was hope. It was a terrifying, fragile thing. Maybe, She whispered to the empty cabin. Maybe I can love again. A new rhythm began, fragile as ice. They were snowed in, trapped in their mountain fortress. The days were short, the nights impossibly long. Caleb hunted. He set snares, catching rabbits and grouse. He was good at it. He was a silent, patient hunter. Rosalie made their home. She used the last of the flour to make flatbread. She boiled snow for water. She mended their clothes until they were more patches than cloth, and at night, by the fire, she would take out the primer. The world, he would sound out, his deep voice a rumble in the small room. World, she would correct gently, her hand on his arm. The world is white. Yes, she'd smile. Yes, it is. He was a man and she was a woman. They were building a life from the scraps of what the world had left them. He was checking his trap lines one afternoon, high on the ridge above the cabin. He liked it up here. He could see everything. The sky was a sharp, painful blue. The world was endless white and green pine. He felt almost at peace. He was a survivor. He never stopped watching. His eyes scanned the valley below. The path they had taken up, it was all snow, undisturbed. He looked farther east, miles away. A wisp of gray. He froze. He squinted, his eyes watering in the bright sun. It was not a cloud. It was not a natural forming mist. It was smoke, a small, thin column of it, rising from the tree line where the plains met the mountains. It was a campfire. Someone was down there. Someone was following. The smoke was a betrayal. It was a thin gray finger rising from the valley, pointing directly at their lives. Caleb watched it from the ridge, his body gone cold. He was a fool. He had let the peace of the cabin, the warmth of Rosalie, make him soft. He had believed, for a few days, that they were safe. He didn't run back. He moved like a shadow through the trees, his rifle in his hand. The trap line was forgotten. He was a soldier again. When he reached the cabin, Rosalie was by the fire, mending his shirt. She looked up and smiled, a small, tired smile that had become his new son. The smile died when she saw his face. "What is it?" she asked, her hand going to her throat. "They're here," he said. His voice was flat. "Down in the valley, 3 riders. They'll be here by afternoon." She didn't panic. He had taught her, without meaning to, how to face the end. She just nodded, her face pale. "The bounty hunter, and 2 others, hired men." He went to the single window and peered out. "This cabin is a box. It's a trap." "We can run," she said, her voice a whisper. "To the high rocks. They can't follow us there. They'll wait. We have no food. We'll freeze. No, we fight here." He began to work. He was no longer the man who struggled with words. He was an engine of war. "Put out the fire. It makes a target. Pile the snow by the door, high as you can. It'll stop a bullet." Rosalie did as he said, her fear a cold knot in her stomach. She used the stew pot to shovel snow, packing it against the inside of the flimsy door. Caleb checked his rifle. He had 30 cartridges. The mule and the horse were in the small, roofless lean-to. He couldn't get them out. "They'll take the animals," he said. "Let them," Rosalie replied, her breath clouding. "Just let them." He pushed the heavy, crude table against the wall, near the window, and laid his cartridges on it. He gave Rosalie his knife. "If they get in, if I go down, you know what to do. Do not let them take you." She looked at the knife, then at him. "I won't." They waited. The cabin grew cold. The silence was absolute. Hours passed. The sun began to slide down the far side of the mountain. They heard the horses first, the crunch of hooves on snow. They were moving slow. Cautious. A voice called out. The bounty hunter, the smooth, cold voice from the saloon. "Caleb Mercer, I know you're in there. I have 2 men with rifles. Don't be a fool. Send out the girl, and we'll let you walk away." Caleb rested his rifle on the windowsill. He aimed at the stand of pines where the voice had come from. "She's not property, you bastard!" Caleb yelled. "She is to the law," the voice called back. Closer now. Last chance. Soldier, I've got your warrant, too. For horse theft. You're a wanted man. You can't run from this." "Go to hell," Caleb said. The first shot was not his. It was a roar from the trees. The bullet punched through the wooden wall, 6 inches from his head, showering the room with splinters. Rosalie screamed and dropped to the floor, crawling behind the snow-packed door. Caleb didn't flinch. He saw the muzzle flash. He aimed just below it and fired. A scream. Not a shout of pain, but a sharp cry of surprise. A man stumbled out from behind a large pine, clutching his chest. He looked down, as if confused, then fell face first into the snow. He didn't move again. "Jed!" the bounty hunter roared. "You son of a bitch! Mercer!" Another shot. This one hit the lean-to. The horse screamed, a high, terrified sound. "They're splitting up," Caleb hissed. "One's moving to the right." He was a veteran. They were amateurs. They were loud. He saw a shadow move behind the woodpile. He fired again. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. A cry of pain. "He hit me! My arm!" "Hold your position! Damn you!" the hunter shouted. Caleb was reloading. He knew the hunter was the real threat. The hunter was smart. He was circling, trying to get a new angle. Rosalie huddled by the door, her eyes shut tight. "Caleb," she prayed, over and over. He saw him, the hunter, a dark coat against the white snow, moving fast, low to the ground, trying to get to the cabin's blind side. Caleb shifted his aim, but the third man, the one shot in the arm, panicked. He broke from cover and ran, scrambling back toward the horses. "I'm hit! I ain't dying here!" The bounty hunter stopped. He was exposed. He cursed, his voice clear in the cold air. He raised his rifle toward the cabin, but Caleb was already there. The hunter was smart. He didn't shoot. He dropped to the snow, presenting the smallest possible target. "This ain't over! Mercer!" he screamed. He began to crawl backward, dragging himself toward the trees. Caleb had a clear shot. He could end it. He could kill the man who had haunted them. His finger tightened on the trigger. He saw the man's panicked eyes. Even from this distance, he didn't shoot. He watched as the bounty hunter reached the trees, grabbed the panicked, wounded man, and threw him onto a horse. He mounted his own. In a spray of snow, they were gone, riding hard back down the mountain, leaving the dead man where he lay. The silence that fell was heavier, more profound than any they had known. "They're gone," Rosalie whispered. "For now," Caleb said. He stayed at the window for a long minute, his rifle steady. He was listening. Nothing, just the wind. He turned from the window. The adrenaline was draining, leaving him hollow. "It's over." He took a step toward her, and his leg buckled. He fell, catching himself on the table, his face white. "Caleb!" He looked down. A dark stain was spreading across his left thigh. "Damn," he whispered. "I didn't even feel it." The last shot, the one the hunter had taken as he dropped. It hadn't missed. Rosalie was at his side in an instant. The nurse was back. The terror was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. "Get on the cot, now!" He gritted his teeth and dragged himself to the cot, leaving a dark trail on the floor. He lay back, his breathing harsh. She took his knife. "This is going to hurt. Just do it!" She cut his trousers away. The wound was high on his thigh, a nasty, blue-lipped hole, bleeding sluggishly. "It's deep," she said. Her voice was shaking, but her hands were not yet. "I have to see if it's gone through, or if the lead is still in." She took a burning brand from the fireplace and pressed it into the wound. He roared, his body arching off the cot, his hands gripping the wood frame so hard his knuckles turned white. The smell of seared flesh filled the cabin. "It's in," she said, her voice tight. "The bleeding stopped. Now I have to get it." She took the knife. "Hold on, Caleb, hold on." He turned his face to the wall. This was harder than the shoulder. That had been a clean wound. This was muscle, and it was deep. Her hands began to shake. She was probing, cutting, feeling for the metal. He was silent, but his whole body was rigid. A wire pulled to the breaking point. "I can't. It's too deep," she sobbed, tears blurring her vision. "You can," he ground out, his voice a rasp. "You can do it." She took a deep breath. She plunged the knife deeper. He screamed, a raw, animal sound that was torn from his throat. Her knife clinked, a small, dull sound. Clink. "I have it," she whispered. She worked the knife, leveraging the piece of flattened lead. It was agonizing. Finally, she hooked it and pulled it free, a bloody, ragged piece of metal. She dropped it on the floor. Caleb was gasping, his body slick with sweat. She took the needle and thread from her sewing kit. She poured the last of their drinking water over the wound, cleaning it as best she could. Her hands were shaking violently now. The adrenaline was gone. She couldn't thread the needle. I can't, she wept. "Rosalie." She looked at him. His eyes were clear, even through the haze of pain. "Look at me," he commanded. She did. "You can. You are the strongest person I know. Now, stitch me up." She took a breath. She held the needle up. She threaded it on the first try. She began to sew, her stitches small and tight, just as she had sewn his shirt. He winced with every pull, but he did not make another sound. When she was done, she tied the knot and cut the thread. She was covered in his blood. She collapsed onto the floor, her body trembling, and finally let the sobs come. He lay on the cot, breathing, just breathing. After a long time, she crawled to his side. She laid her head on his chest. "You can't leave me," she whispered, her voice broken. "Everyone leaves. My mother, everyone. Don't you leave me, Caleb. Don't you dare die." He lifted his hand, his movement slow, and touched her hair. His fingers were stained with his own blood. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. He was quiet for a long time. She listened to the slow, pained beat of his heart. "You know," he whispered, his voice rough, "when I found you, I thought you were my punishment for Sarah, for my boy. I thought God, or whatever's left, had sent you to me to make me suffer, to make me care again, just so I could lose something else." He stroked her hair. "I was wrong." He waited until she looked up at him, her face streaked with tears and blood. "You're not my punishment, Rosalie. You're what makes me afraid to die." They stayed like that, huddled together in the cold, bloody cabin, while the sun set and the man he had killed grew cold in the snow outside. They had to leave. The hunter would be back. He would bring more men. He would bring the law. "We can't run," Caleb said 2 days later. He was sitting up, his leg propped on a stool. He was pale, but the fire was back in his eyes. "I can't ride fast, and they'll just hunt us. We'll be running for the rest of our lives." "Then what?" Rosalie asked. She was packing their few supplies. "We go back." She froze. "Back? To Dry Hollow? They'll hang you." "Maybe," he said. "But that hunter, he and his men, they shot at us. They tried to kill us. They murdered that man out there. That's a crime, even for a bounty hunter. He came onto my claim. He shot first." "Your claim?" Caleb pointed to the wall. "This cabin, this land. We're on it. It's ours. We're not running. We're going to face them." He saw the terror in her eyes. "It's the only way, Rosalie, or we're animals, hiding in a hole. Forever." She nodded, her jaw set. "All right, we go back." He took his knife, the one she had used to dig out the bullet. He found a flat piece of pine bark. He sat by the fire, and in the careful, clumsy letters she had taught him, he began to carve. He carved his name, Calebmercer. Then, beneath it, he carved hers, Rosalieline. He held it up. "Mercer Lane," he said. She touched the wood. It was their name. He nailed it to the door, over the bullet holes. They rode back down the mountain, slow and careful. Caleb was tied into the saddle of the roan. The mule was gone, likely taken by the hunter. They rode into Dry Hollow, not as fugitives, but as citizens. The town was different. There was a new, official-looking buggy outside the saloon, one with a government seal. Caleb and Rosalie walked into the saloon. It went silent. The bounty hunter was there, sitting at a table. His arm was in a sling. He smiled when he saw them. A cold, thin smile. But he was not the man in charge. A man in a black suit, with a hard, clean-shaven face, stood up from the bar. "Caleb Mercer?" he asked. "That's me," Caleb said. "I'm Federal Marshal Elias Stone, and this is Judge Hawthorne." He indicated another man, older, with a gray beard, who was reading a file. "I'm here to file a complaint," Caleb said, his hand resting on the nameplate he had pulled from the cabin door. "This man," he pointed at the hunter, "and 2 others attacked my claim. They shot me. They murdered one of their own men. I'm here to see him arrested." The marshal did not even look at the hunter. His eyes were on Rosalie. "Are you Rosalie Lane, formerly of the Denver territory?" the marshal asked. His voice was not unkind. It was just law. Rosalie looked at Caleb. He gave her a small, tight nod. "We don't run." "I am," she said, her voice clear. The marshal nodded. He stepped forward. "Rosalie Lane, I have a warrant for your arrest, filed by Mr. Silas Croft, for fleeing your legal contract of indentured servitude." "No," Caleb said, stepping in front of her. "You don't understand. He's the one." "Mr. Mercer," the judge said, looking up for the first time. His voice was like dry leaves. "Your claim of assault is a local matter. This," he held up the warrant, "is a federal matter. Property rights. We've been tracking this bounty hunter, Mr. Slade, for weeks, ever since he reported his difficulties in apprehending the fugitive. He is a licensed agent of the court." The world tilted. The law he had come to. It was on their side. "You can't," Caleb whispered. "I can," the marshal said. He pulled a pair of iron shackles from his belt. "Ma'am, please put your hands behind your back." Rosalie began to tremble. She looked at Caleb, her eyes wide with a terror he had not seen in the cabin. This was worse than bullets. This was the law. "Caleb," she whispered. "No!" Caleb roared. He went for his gun. He never cleared the holster. The marshal moved. A blur of black cloth. He slammed Caleb against the wall, his forearm against Caleb's throat. The marshal was strong. "Don't be a fool," the marshal said, his voice low. "You'll just add resisting a federal officer to your list. Right now, all I have is a warrant for horse theft from the livery, which I am inclined to ignore. Given the circumstances, do not make this worse." Caleb watched, helpless, his body pinned, as Judge Hawthorne walked over to Rosalie. The judge, not the marshal, fastened the shackles around her wrists. The sound of the iron clicking shut was the loudest sound Caleb had ever heard. "I appeal to you," Caleb choked out, his voice crushed by the marshal's arm. "I appeal to the law. This isn't right." The judge looked at him, his eyes cold. "The law is the law, Mr. Mercer. Not what you or I think is right. She is property, and she ran. Take her to the wagon. Marshal." Caleb watched them lead her away. He saw her look back at him, her face a mask of utter despair. He had failed her. He was standing right here, and he was failing her again. They put him in the stable room, the same one. They bolted it from the outside. He was a prisoner. Through the one small window, he could see the wagon. He could see Rosalie, sitting in the back, her hands chained. He knew he could get out. The window was weak. The guard outside was the same one-eyed liveryman, and he was already drinking. Caleb could be out in 5 minutes. He could get his gun. He could kill the marshal. He could kill the judge. He could take her and run. He could become the man he used to be, the animal, the killer. He was measuring the window frame when the door bolted was drawn. The marshal stood there. "She asked to see you." Rosalie was standing between 2 guards. They let her step inside. "You have 1 minute," the marshal said, and closed the door. She ran to him. He held her, the chains cold against his back. "Tonight," he whispered in her ear, his voice a low, vicious growl. "When they move you, I'll be there. I'll get you out. I don't care who I have to kill." She pulled back, her chained hands coming up to grip his shirt. "No. Rosalie, they are taking you." "No," she said, her voice fierce, her eyes burning. "Listen to me, Caleb. If you do that, we are lost. We will be hunted forever. We will be everything they say we are, a killer and his property. I won't let them." "You will," she said, her voice breaking. "You will. You will fight them. But not like that. Not with a gun. You said you weren't that man anymore. Don't let them make you him. Don't you dare." "How?" he cried, his voice breaking. "How can I fight this? With your words," she whispered. "The ones I taught you, with the law. You go to the judge. You tell them our story. You use your name. You use my name. You read, 'You can do this. Promise me, Caleb. Promise me you won't become him. Promise me.'" He looked at her, at the iron on her wrists. He looked at the window. He could save her. Right now. With violence. She was asking him to trust a world that had only ever betrayed him. She was asking him to put down the rifle and pick up the primer. It was the hardest choice of his life. "I promise," he whispered. The door opened. The marshal stood there. "Time." She kissed him. A hard, desperate kiss. "I love you," she whispered. "Now fight for me." He watched them lead her away. He did not go to the window. He sat on the cot, his head in his hands, and kept his promise. Months turned to iron. Winter seized the high plains, locking the world in a grip of brittle cold. Caleb did not go to Denver. He stayed in Dry Hollow, a ghost in the town that hated him. He kept his promise. He was a pariah. The townsfolk saw him as the man who had brought federal marshals in trouble. The fine for the stolen horses and wagon, which Judge Hawthorne had levied before leaving, was steep. $200. Caleb didn't have $2, so he was put to work. He was, in effect, an indentured servant himself, working off his debt to the town. He dug, but not wells. He dug graves in the frozen earth of the new cemetery. He dug ditches for drainage. He shoveled manure from the livery, the same livery where he had hidden Rosalie. He was given a bunk in that same cold tack room. He slept where she had slept, and it was both a comfort and a torment. He worked from before dawn until long after dark. His body, already broken, was pushed to its limit. His wounded leg was a constant, screaming fire. His ribs ached with every breath of frigid air. He ate watery stew and stale bread, the scraps given to him by the liveryman, and he saved. Every cent he was credited beyond his debt. He kept, it was a pittance, a few cents a week, but he hoarded it. He also used his new skill in the dark of the tack room, by the light of a single, precious candle. He practiced his letters. He read the Denver Clarion when it was a week old and used for packing. He spelled out the words, his finger tracing the print. War, Congress, murder. He tried to file an appeal. He walked to the telegraph office. The clerk looked at his muddy, ragged clothes and his calloused hands, and laughed. "Appeal? On what grounds?" "Drifter." "On the grounds that she's a person," Caleb said, his voice low. "She's a mulatto, and she's property. Get out." He knew he couldn't do it alone. He was a killer, a digger. He was not a talker. He needed a man who was. The name Harrison was spoken in the saloon, a place Caleb only entered to sweep the floors. Major Elias Harrison, a new federal commissioner, sent from Washington to clean up the territory. A hard man, a Union man, an officer. Caleb knew what he had to do. He had $40 saved. It had taken him 4 months of winter hell to earn it. He used 20 of it to buy back his horse. Judge, from the liveryman, who had confiscated him. He used 5 more for supplies. He left Dry Hollow in the dead of night, not a fugitive, but a petitioner. He rode for 3 days, through a blizzard, to Denver. He looked like a creature of the snow, half frozen. When he arrived, he found the federal building, a soldier, in a clean blue uniform, blocked the door. "State your business, old man." Caleb's hair and beard were long, frosted with ice. He looked 70, not 30. "I'm here to see Major Harrison." "The Major is a busy man. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I served with the 20th Maine." The soldier's expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered. "The 20th Maine, Gettysburg." "Wait here." Caleb was left in a hallway for 6 hours. Men in suits walked by, ignoring him. Finally, the door opened. Major Harrison was a man carved from granite. He had a stiff collar, a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes that had seen everything and forgiven nothing. "You were at Gettysburg?" he asked, without greeting. "No, sir. Appomattox. I joined late. After—" Caleb stopped. He didn't speak of his family. "I was with the supply train, but I was there." "You have 2 minutes, Mercer," Harrison said, sitting behind a large oak desk. "Then I'm having you thrown out for vagrancy." Caleb took a breath. He did not talk about love. He did not talk about feelings. He talked about the law. "Sir, you have a man in your territory. Silas Croft, who is engaging in slavery. He calls it indenture, but he is buying and selling human beings. He is using licensed bounty hunters to enforce it with guns. He is paying local judges to uphold it." Harrison's face was stone. "You are referring to the fugitive, Rosalie Lane. I have the file. The indenture paper is legal." "The paper is legal," Caleb agreed, his voice rough. Rosalie had taught him this. "But the enforcement is not. He is using it as a cover for things the 13th Amendment was supposed to stop. He is breaking the law, sir, a federal law. The bounty hunter he hired, Slade, murdered one of his own men on my claim. They shot at us. They tried to kill us, and Judge Hawthorne let him go and arrested her." Harrison leaned forward. "Your claim?" "Yes, sir. The cabin. We filed a claim. We put our names on it." He pulled the scorched, carved piece of pine bark from his coat. He had saved it. He laid it on the polished desk. Mercer Lane. Harrison stared at the crude carving. He stared at the name. He looked at this ragged, broken man who had fought for the Union and who was now fighting for one woman. "Leave this with me," Harrison said, his voice flat. He did not promise anything. "Go back to Dry Hollow. Do your work. Do not cause any more trouble. If I hear you've so much as looked at a man sideways, I will let you rot." Caleb nodded. "Yes, sir." He walked out. His $25 appeal made, the jail in Denver was a brick box. Rosalie was in a basement cell with 6 other women, prostitutes, thieves, and one woman who had killed her husband. It was cold, damp, and smelled of human misery. The food was a thin gruel, barely enough to keep them alive. The matrons were cruel, seeing the women as filth, and Rosalie, with her educated voice and light skin, as the worst kind of filth, an uppity half-breed. She was stripped, her dress was burned. Her hair was cut short, to the scalp, to prevent lice. She was given a rough, gray shift to wear. She thought she would die. For the first week, she lay on the floor and wished for it. She thought of Caleb. She prayed he had kept his promise, that he was not, at this very moment, lying dead in a snowdrift with a bullet in his back. Then, one night, the woman in the bunk next to her, a young girl named Mary, began to cry. A deep, hopeless sobbing. I can't, Mary wept. He sent me a letter, my man, and I can't read it." Rosalie sat up. Her mother's voice came to her. "No one can take what is in your head." "Give it to me," Rosalie whispered. The guard let her have the letter, by the light of the moon, through the one, high, barred window. Rosalie read it. It was a simple, loving letter, from a simple man. After that, Rosalie had a purpose. She was not a prisoner. She was a teacher. She had no books. She had no slate. So she used the floor. She used a piece of charcoal she had smuggled from the boiler room. She taught Mary her letters. Then she taught the others. In the dark, cold cell. She held a class. She gave them the one thing the law could not take. She gave them words. It kept her alive. It kept her sane. It was her own quiet war. Major Harrison was a thorough man. He did not like Silas Croft. He did not like men who believed the war had changed nothing. He sent a man, not a soldier, but an investigator, to look into Croft's business. At the same time, Samuel Finney, a young, hungry reporter for the Denver Clarion, was looking for a story. He heard whispers of Harrison's investigation. He went to Dry Hollow. He talked to the liveryman. He talked to the saloon keeper. He heard the story of the crazy drifter, the shootout at the cabin, and the mulatto girl. Finney smelled a story bigger than just a local crime. He rode to the cabin. He found the dead man's grave, which Caleb had dug. He found the Mercer Lane nameplate, still nailed to the door. He went to Denver. He found the jail and, with a bribe, managed to see Rosalie. He expected a frightened, ignorant girl. He found a calm, articulate, educated woman who was teaching a grammar class in a jail cell. His story was an explosion. It was printed on the front page. Slavery in Colorado. It told of Silas Croft, the wealthy rancher who bought women like cattle. It told of Caleb Mercer, the broken Union hero who had fought a war for freedom and was now fighting it again for one woman. It told of Rosalie Lane, the captive teacher who was more of a lady in her prison cell than her captors are in their mansions. The story was picked up by papers in Chicago. In New York, the territory was embarrassed. Major Harrison had the political cover he needed. He went to the federal court. He did not ask for an appeal. He asked for a new trial, on the grounds that Rosalie Lane was being held illegally under the 13th Amendment, and that Silas Croft was under suspicion for conspiracy and kidnapping. The trial was set for the spring. The courtroom in Denver was the largest Caleb had ever seen. It was filled with dark wood, high ceilings, and sunlight streaming through tall windows. It was packed. Samuel Finney was in the front row, his pencil flying. Major Harrison was near the back, his arms crossed, watching. Caleb sat in the gallery. He was clean. He had spent his last dollar on a new shirt and a shave. He looked not like a drifter. He looked like a man. He was terrified. The side door opened. "All right." The judge entered. A new judge, a hard man from the east. Then they brought in Rosalie. She was so thin. The gray prison shift hung on her like a shroud. Her feet were bare. Her hair was a short, ragged cap. She was a wraith, pale and trembling, her eyes fixed on the floor. She looked like she had been buried. Caleb's heart broke. He had done this. His promise. He should have used his gun. She was seated. She did not look up. "The court calls Rosalie Lane." The judge said. She stood, her body swaying. "Do you see her?" Silas Croft's lawyer, a slick man in a silk vest, boomed. "A vagrant, a runaway, a thief, my client, a pillar of this community. She's a teacher." Caleb said. His voice cut through the room. It was not loud, but it was clear. Rosalie's head snapped up. She scanned the crowd, her eyes wide. She found him. She saw him, clean, steady. His eyes locked on hers. And a miracle happened. Caleb watched as the life flooded back into her. Her shoulders, which had been slumped in despair, straightened. Her chin, which had been tucked in defeat, rose. The color returned to her face. She was not a prisoner. She was not a victim. She was Rosalie Lane, and she was ready to fight. The trial was brutal. Croft's lawyer presented the indenture paper, signed and sealed. He presented the law. The law is the law. He argued. Personal feelings have no place. Major Harrison's prosecutor argued the 13th Amendment. He argued that the paper was a front for slavery. The court calls Caleb Mercer. Caleb walked to the stand. He was sworn in. "Mr. Mercer." The prosecutor began. "Tell the court how you came to know the defendant." Caleb looked at Rosalie. She gave him a small, fierce nod. He began. He spoke, his voice low and rough, but steady. He told them everything. He told them about the war. He told them about his wife and son, about the burned-out homestead. The courtroom was silent. This was not in the file. He told them about finding Rosalie, about the buzzards, about the bullet. He told them about the shack and the storm. She taught me, he said, his voice thick. She taught me to read. He pulled the worn McGuffey's reader from his coat pocket. I was a hollow man, an animal. She made me a man again. He told them about the stable room. He told them about the bounty hunter. I stole a wagon, he said, looking at the judge. I stole 2 horses. I'd do it again. I took her to the mountains, to a cabin. We made a home. I carved this. He pulled out the pine bark nameplate. Mercer Lane. He held it up. We are not a master and a slave. We are a family. He told them about the shootout. Slade shot first. He killed his own man. He shot me. I did not murder anyone. I was defending my home, and I was defending my wife. A gasp went through the courtroom. She is not my wife by law, Caleb corrected, his face red. She is more than that. She is the reason I am alive. He finished. He sat down. The silence in the room was absolute. The judge looked at his papers for a long time. He looked at Silas Croft, who was now sweating. He looked at Rosalie, who was sitting tall. He looked at Caleb. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, the judge said, his voice ringing, is not a suggestion. It is the law. It is the higher law. This court finds that any contract, indenture or otherwise, that treats a human being as chattel to be hunted, bought, and sold, is in fact a mechanism of slavery, and is therefore null and void. He pointed his gavel at Rosalie. Rosalie Lane, you are free to go. The courtroom exploded. Rosalie was crying, her hands over her mouth. Caleb stood, but he didn't move. The judge slammed his gavel. Order, order! We are not finished. The room quieted. However, the judge said, his eyes hard on Caleb, the law is the law. You, Mr. Mercer, have admitted in this court to horse theft. You have admitted to vigilantism. The shootout, while perhaps justified, has left a cloud over this territory. A cloud I intend to clear. Caleb's heart sank. Your fine of $200, paid to the town of Dry Hollow, is upheld. Your debt of labor is discharged, but your presence, it is disruptive. I am ordering you to vacate this territory. You have 24 hours to leave Colorado. If you are seen here after that, you will be arrested for vagrancy and sentenced to 6 months hard labor. Caleb had won, and he had lost. He had freed her, only to be banished. He stood outside the courthouse. The air was cool, but the snow was gone. The first buds of spring were on the trees. The world was new. He had Judge. He had his rifle. He had $5 in his pocket. He was a drifter again. The door opened. Rosalie walked out. She was still in the gray prison shift, but someone, a woman from the newspaper, had thrown a shawl over her shoulders. She walked straight to him. She didn't say anything. She just stood in front of him, her eyes searching his. I have to leave, he whispered. I have to go. I know, she said. Her voice was strong. I don't know where I'm going. I have nothing. You have me, she said. She reached out and touched his face. I don't care where we go, Caleb. Just let it be with you. The final scene. They are not in Colorado. They are in a high valley in Wyoming. The world is green, so green it hurts his eyes. A river, full of snowmelt, rushes beside them. He is on Judge. She is on a small mare he bought with the last of his money. They ride side by side. Her hair is growing out, a dark curl against her neck. She is wearing a new dress, simple, made of blue calico. She looks beautiful. Their hands, his scarred and hers dark and slender, rest near each other on the reins. He moves his hand, just an inch, and his fingers brush hers. A simple touch. It is everything. He stops his horse. He looks out over the valley. It is vast. It is empty. It is a promise. The war took everything, Caleb says, his voice quiet. My home, my family, my soul. But you gave me back something I forgot I still had. She turns to him. her smile soft. "Hope?" she asks. He looks at her, and the ice that has been in his eyes for 8 years, the coldness is gone. It has melted. He smiles, a real smile, a smile that reaches his eyes. "No," he says. He leans in, his hand finding hers and lacing their fingers together on the reins. A reason to stay alive. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please let us know where in the world you're listening from in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this. And share your thoughts in English.